Hello, carbon-based listeners and silicon-powered friends. Welcome to Mastering the Machine, the podcast where humans and automation collide in perfect harmony. I'm your host, Frank Lamb, and whether you're flesh and blood or circuits and code, we're here to explore industrial automation together. From factory floors to digital cores, we're exploring how machines are reshaping our world, one algorithm at a time. So plug in, power up, and let's master the machine together.
Hello everyone and Happy New Year. It is currently December the 31st, 2025, and today's episode, I want to go back to something that happened in 2010 where I found a book called The Art of Non-Conformity by a guy named Chris Guillebeau, which interestingly I met him this year for the first time. But his book was pretty influential on my life at the time. I did a lot of new things after reading that book. I read it in 2010 and then for some reason got real motivated to make a lot of changes. In 2011, I came out with a CD. It was something that has been on my bucket list for a long time, put out a CD called Automatica, kind of fitting considering my profession. And then in 2012, I left the company that I was working for, and I went to Central America for a month. And then I started the current iteration of my company, Automation Consulting LLC. And then 2013, I had already started writing a book in 2011, and I was able to publish that book in 2013 through McGraw-Hill. So it was a very profitable and successful couple of years, and I give a lot of credit to Chris and reading that book. And what kind of prompts today's material is on his website, which is chrisguillebeau.com. He does something called an annual review. It is not making New Year's resolutions or anything like that, but it's kind of at the end of the year. He does an annual review, talks about what went well and what didn't go so well for the previous year. And then he also makes some plans for the next year. Again, not resolutions, but just some, hopefully, a roadmap for the next year. And I'm going to do that today and talk about kind of what worked and what didn't for me. And it turns out I did do a lot of things in 2025, but I don't know that I would consider it particularly successful. So I'm going to go through kind of what I did over the last year, what I did and what just happened to me. So the first month started out pretty well. I went down to American Beverage Depot, which I've talked about before, and I believe I started that on January 12th and did one of my typical 2+ week trips down there and did a bunch of systems integration and hung out with Juan Pablo Garbin, who is the owner, and worked on some of the systems down there. It was a really good start to the year, and of course I was making a little bit of money for the company. So overall, pretty good trip. And then I came back here for about 10 days and went back in February. So started out, when I go to make these trips, it pretty much makes my income for a month, right? If I do a 2+ week job down there, it really generates enough income for me to survive for another month. So overall, 2 pretty good months right there. Somewhere during that time, I quoted a job for CrowdStrike, of all people, and built a little, I guess you'd call it a trainer. It's a demo using the Fisher Technique factory. You can find that on my YouTube channel. I'll put that in the show notes here. But that job was a Siemens 1200 processor. And I bought it from my local distributor and had to work with them to make it go, because I really wasn't familiar with I believe it's called a unified panel, and it really does put all the software together, and you have to make it work. There were a lot of installs and a little bit of frustration there. But looking back on that job, that was another pretty successful job in that it took almost exactly 1 month. I got back from ABD at the end of February, started that job at the beginning of March, and finished it by the end of March. And then I went back to ABD and left for there on, I believe it was the 30th of March. So I was already done and had shipped the little project for CrowdStrike. So the year started pretty well as far as income and success for my company. Doing lots of integration, didn't have any classes from automation training, and I was just, I guess, 5 or 6 months removed from doing all the automation NTH work that I had done the previous 3 years. So I thought the year got off to a pretty good start. But somewhere around March, something that kind of happened to me was Automation Training, the company that I contract to for teaching, bought out another company here in the United States called Automation Training also. And they really bought it for a couple reasons. One, for the customer list, right? It's prospective new customers and new people to teach. And also for the domain name, because they were automationtraining.ca and they got automationtraining.com. I'm not sure if they did anything with automationtraining.com, the website, but they did end up with that domain name. And they also made a deal saying, hey, we want either all of the equipment that you used or none of the equipment that you used. And since the owner of the company, who was up in Indiana, didn't really have a use for all that equipment, Steve from Automation Training ended up purchasing that equipment along with the domain name and the customer list. So he didn't have a way to ship that to Canada. At that time, I believe Trump had just been elected and there were some tariffs going both ways. So shipping things across the border was somewhat problematic. And so he asked if I could take that equipment at my facility. And since I'm not too far from Indiana, they drove it down and they dropped it off. And one of the unfortunate things about that, it was a lot more equipment than I thought it would be. And it completely filled my very small facility here, which is just an old 3-bedroom house. It filled my shop, which I have a little shop with a mill and a 3D printer and a few tools and things like that. But I used that for teaching, and it pretty much filled it front to back. So I spent a good bit of the next 6 months kind of organizing that stuff. And that was the first problem that I kind of ran into after April, is I really had to have a place to put it. So I built a little shed next to this old house and I put all the stuff in there, and it took months to inventory and build that little shed, get the concrete poured, get all the permits and everything, and then put all the stuff in it, inventory it, and then I did build a little store. And that store is on Shopify, and as of the end of this year, I have sold exactly 0. So it really has cost me to have all that equipment in time and space and money, and I haven't really benefited from it at all. So that was something that really didn't work last year. In April of last year, again, my last trip to ABD, and then there was an Assembly South show here in Nashville, and I did attend that and actually shared a booth with David Turner, who was kind of closing down Turner Industrial Automation. And at that time, he had taken another job, and so he kind of teamed up with that company and showed some of their products and had some of his old flyers, and I brought some of my flyers to the Assembly show. And then that same month, I also subcontracted to David at a company up in Lexington. That was another thing that I don't think I would consider particularly successful, in that they were short jobs. So one of the trips was only 2 days long. I went up there and did a little bit of programming, and David did some wiring, and then made another trip up there. And one of the things I learned early on is that we were probably more interested in the work than they were in having us do the work. So went up there and they had all kinds of communication problems and things, and they had the opportunity to, for instance, wire the entire line, but chose to only wire one station. And so David ended up pulling the wire for that. I ended up making the programming changes, but they were not a particularly together customer. So I decided not to do any further work with them. And David, of course, already had another job. So he was busy doing that. Now that was also, May was also the month that I met Chris Guillebeau, which brought on another change. So up until about August, I was doing webinars for the Automation Academy and doing recorded video webinars. And I decided when I went to see Chris, it just happened to be at a podcasting meetup at the Entrepreneur Center here in Nashville, and Chris Guillebeau was the speaker. And I didn't know it was at a podcasting meetup, so I just went to see Chris, and I got my book signed and met him for the first time after, I guess, 15 years after I'd bought his first book. I had him sign my book. And that's when I met a bunch of podcasters. And I kind of had to ask myself, well, why didn't I ever start a podcast? Why did I do webinars for the Automation Academy, but never had just a plain old audio podcast? After all, I listen to podcasts all the time. I've listened to Chris Guillebeau's podcast. I've listened to Tim Ferriss's podcast, and I very much enjoy driving and just listening to podcasts. So at that time, I decided to start my own podcast and start attending the Podcasters Meetup, which is monthly, basically, at the Entrepreneur Center here in Nashville. So I went to another meetup in June. During that time, I met a couple people that helped people put podcasts together and got a little bit of professional help and met with them a couple times. Interesting name for their company was Mouthy Broad Media. So D.R. Fay is the owner of that company, and I thought that was kind of an interesting name. And she was very helpful in showing me how to create a true podcast. Also in June, I was working on getting the podcast started, but also took a quick class on B&R automation. And this was for ABD. Again, they were going to put in a B&R shrink wrapper, which involves a lot of motion control. And so I took a 3-day class along with Andres at ABD, and we took it together just online, and they shipped us the B&R controller. And I did make a little video showing kind of how the B&R worked. I believe I also put out a blog post on that. But one of the things that was very unfortunate during the summer was I really didn't do much work. I made probably 3 trips to Lexington for that Cummins plant, and the rest of the time was busy dealing with all those products that had showed up here and getting the facility built. Concrete, interestingly, was poured in June, and I put my little name and the date on the concrete, so I will always remember exactly when that was, because it says ALLC 625, and put my initials after it, like people do with concrete all over the place. Then another thing that I did is I got connected to a company called How to Robot. And How to Robot is a Danish company, but they have kind of co-CEOs, and one of the CEOs lives in Denmark, and the other one happens to live here in Nashville. And I did a few kind of side jobs for them during, I would say, June through, I guess, September or October. And went to a bunch of different places, Michigan and Washington State, Colorado, even Knoxville here local. And that kind of helped pay the bills a little bit, although the jobs are slightly short and they're a little under my typical wages when I do systems integration or teaching. But it was still interesting to meet new people, and there was an opportunity to possibly do further work with some of those companies. Now, I didn't turn into anything like that, and as of today, I really haven't done anything else with How to Robot since, I would say, October, but did enjoy the trips that I made.
Before we dive back into today's episode, let me tell you about the team behind Mastering the Machine. When your manufacturing operation needs to level up its automation game, there's one name you need to know: Automation Consulting, LLC. Whether you're integrating new systems, training your workforce, or need expert consulting on industrial automation challenges, we speak both human and machine language fluently. From PLC programming to process optimization, we help manufacturing companies bridge the gap between what is and what's possible. We also host the ultimate training platform for automation professionals. At the Automation Academy, we've created your complete automation learning ecosystem. Our subscription-based training platform gives you unlimited access to comprehensive video courses on systems integration, PLCs, and HMIs. Download technical documents, software tools, and resources that you can actually use in the field. Plus, get personalized job aptitude assistance to advance your career in industrial automation. But here's the best part: connect with fellow automation professionals on IO Central, our exclusive social media platform where the automation community shares knowledge, solves problems, and builds the future together. Whether you're a seasoned engineer or just starting your automation journey, everything you need is at www.automationllc.com. That's automationllc.com. Join the subscription platform where automation expertise meets community. Now back to today's episode.
I did have one automation training class in August, and I believe that was in Chicago. Then I went to Houston and had a class in September, and then recently had another one in Chicago. So only 3 classes for automation training this year. And I would say those 4 little jobs for How to Robot, but really didn't do anything else much from, I would say, May until October. And October, one of the big things that I did that was pretty fun was I went on my 40th anniversary, went on a Viking cruise to Europe and started out in near Amsterdam, went to Edam and stayed for a couple days, then got on the boat and traveled up the Rhine and got to visit lots of places that I'd always wanted to visit, like Strasbourg, France, and Cologne, and Bavaria, went up into the Black Forest and really enjoyed the trip. My wife and I both did. And then we ended up in Lucerne for a couple days, and then we flew back. And that took up a lot of the beginning of October. So, of course, I wasn't working during that period either. Then did my trip to Chicago and taught a class for automation training. And then did subcontract a couple of jobs for Patrick Bunn, who has been on here before. And I went to Mississippi for those. I'm not going to tell who the customer was. And the first trip I thought was great. Weather was good, enjoyed the work, got a lot done. And then the second trip, a little bit less so. One thing was freezing cold. Another thing was I had a little bit of a conflict with somebody that was brought in there as an expert on the system. And he was an expert on his system, but did not know anything about controls. So we had a little bit of a kind of a conflict over what was what, kind of that sort of thing. So I'm not going to get into great detail about that either. But since that time, I have not done any further work. So it's the end of the year, and I look back at the previous year, and I say, what went well and what didn't? Well, I didn't do enough work, and getting more work involves marketing, and I am not a particularly good marketer. So one of the things that I did, I believe it was at the end of November, maybe beginning of December, is I did take on a marketing intern. And he's been helping me put together some things, for instance, resurrecting my MailChimp account so that I can send emails out on a schedule to people. And that's one of the things I plan on doing in next year, is being a little more successful on the marketing side for, my own classes and for systems integration and for the Automation Academy, and for selling used equipment and that sort of thing. Now, this intern I brought on, I'm really just using him purely for the Automation Academy and the training aspect, because it's pretty overwhelming for new people to come in and they look at all the different things that I do and they probably wouldn't know what to concentrate on. So that was pretty much my last year. Let's see, what else did I do? I did go to Tucson in August, which was very hot, and visited my mom for a few days. That was enjoyable. I went to Seattle to visit my daughter in July, and then also OT Skatecon, right? OT Skatecon I've talked about before. That was at the end of July. So some of those trips actually got in the way of probably doing as much work as I would have liked to. But I do have this interesting calendar that goes all the way back to 2012 when I took that first trip to Central America and restarted my company, and every month is in there. So I can look back and see what I've done and what was work and what was just for fun. And the work, I always color code in yellow. And so when I look back at the previous years, last year and this year, there's not a lot of yellow. There's not enough yellow. So there's a lot of other things that I was doing, whether I was creating content or just waiting and looking for work or taking trips on the side. And I am getting older, so yes, I can afford to take a few extra trips. But honestly, I do like to stay busy. So one of my plans, if I was to call it a roadmap for 2026, is do more work, right? Have more consistent work, which is going to involve having to go get that work, do more marketing. Ideally, the Automation Academy, I can build that up and maybe have some live classes, and that would generate income without me having to travel quite as much. But I have not been super successful at doing that so far. I do have this email list, which interestingly crossed 500 members back in May, which made me ineligible to send emails on the current free plan that I was on. So unbeknownst to me, I was not sending emails to people who would download the lead magnets, which are the Mastering the Machine document and the PLC template. And that ended, I believe, last June was the first month that nothing got sent out. So I don't even know if people who downloaded those were able to get the link to the download, because you're supposed to collect the email and then they get the download link. And since it wasn't sending any links out, I am going to, as my New Year's message, send out both links to everybody on that list and kind of apologize and say, hey, folks, I'm sorry if you signed up for this lead magnet and never got it. Hopefully people have been able to find me through my email, right, which is flam@automationllc.com, because I've also discovered that my info@automationllc.com does not send me emails either. So again, marketing and that sort of thing, some of the technology associated with it, is something I haven't been involved enough with. So my roadmap for next year, I plan to be a lot more involved. For one thing, I had to pay for MailChimp. So, and that's somewhere around $45, $49 a month, and I really need to use it. If I'm going to pay, $500 and some dollars, maybe almost $600 for the entire year, I really need to use it, which may involve a newsletter or whatever, but hopefully it will also involve getting more members to my Automation Academy, which really is full of a lot of material. And I do put some ads, of course, here, and on my other webinars, I do put ads for the Automation Academy, but by themselves, they don't lead to as many members as I probably can do with lead magnets and an email sequence like most people probably do for marketing. So that's one of my plans for next year, is get more involved in my own marketing. As far as the rest of things, I've talked a lot about what I do. I do systems integration. I can build small machines, especially small trainers like the one I built last March. As I said, I consider that a pretty successful project. I could still build actual small gauging machines and vision systems, that sort of thing. I do have a pretty nice little shop here to do that with. But, getting jobs like that really involves in-person sales. You really have to go visit the customer and knock on the door and get an appointment with them and kind of talk over what you're going to be proposing. And I'm not sure how much of that I can do, because honestly, people generally, don't contact me for systems integration jobs. I subcontract, right? Sometimes people use me for a subcontracted job because they can't go do it for whatever reason, or they need some of the software or skills that I have. So I get jobs sometimes that way, but I don't get just plants calling me usually out of the blue and saying they need a small machine or a systems integration job done. Now, I may do some how to robot work in the next year. That worked out fairly well in the past year, and there are opportunities to get to know customers that way. We'll see kind of what happens. I don't have a real concrete plan with that, but I have a couple potential jobs coming up with them. I talked to Automation Training, and they said they will be having more classes. They can offer me more classes next year, so that'll be a good thing. I think all the work for Automation NTH is pretty much done. They did a little bit of downsizing and really aren't using me as a contractor anymore for the NTH University work that I was doing before, so I don't see work coming from there. So I do need to replace work coming from somewhere, and it's either going to come from the Automation Academy or classes that I land myself, right? I do custom classes for systems integration, usually at my facility. I try to keep them here because I have certain equipment that really is not ideal to travel with. So I hopefully will be doing more of that. But like I said, this is not a New Year's resolution as such. I don't want to make it that. A lot of times people say they're going to lose weight or exercise and they quit in the first month or two, and I don't really like that. I've done that myself. Last year, as a matter of fact, one of the things that I kind of said I was going to do was I started putting something out on LinkedIn every day. I was putting quotes from kind of well-known people like Seth Godin or Mark Manson or the Stoic guy, I forget, Ryan Holiday, right? I'd put things, if they were inspiring to me, I put things out there, and I actually had on my calendar like day 34, day 35, day 36, and I would record the quotes that I put out. But then I got, on the road, did all that work for ABD, and somewhere in February stopped doing that. It was just kind of too much. A lot of times I get up real early and I take a long walk there in Miami, and then I go into the plant and I'll be there for 12 hours, and by the time I get back, I don't feel like doing any of that kind of stuff anymore, posting things on LinkedIn or whatever. So I really dropped off of that. So there's an example of one of those, sort of like a New Year's resolution that I just didn't stick with. Now, oddly enough, I did lose weight a couple of years ago, not due to any resolution that I made, but just due to a lot more walking and improving my diet, and really mostly stopping drinking completely. I was drinking probably 1 or 2 times a week, going up to the local club here. And interestingly, as soon as I stopped drinking alcohol, I dropped about 15 pounds. So that was probably good for my health. I would say also a kidney stone contributed somewhat to that, because I came back and really started watching my diet a lot more. So not resolutions, but I would say successful in that respect. So again, last year, from a business standpoint, not completely what I would call successful. From a personal standpoint, pretty good. I did some networking, and my family life was mostly pretty good. I did make some trips, right? Got to go to Seattle in Canada, and then got to go to Europe for my 40th anniversary, so that was a lot of fun. And, of course, still got to travel a little bit for training and that sort of thing. And of course got to go to Miami a few times last winter, and didn't go at all in the summer. Did go to Tucson to visit my mom, like I said. And so I'm getting my travel in, but I'm probably going to be doing less of that this year because, again, I don't have an easy method to get those systems integration jobs. I may do some remote training, of course, but most of that is through automation training. I don't really have any trips planned. I have a short one that's a family trip in March that is going to be back to Tucson with the grandkids and things, but don't have anything else really on the calendar as far as travel. No classes currently scheduled. I do have some bids out for my own classes. Don't know if they're going to land. You never know with that sort of thing. They are custom integration classes. But again, that's my outlook for next year. That's my retrospective for the past year. And hopefully you'll get something out of that. That's a little of my story. And what is yours, right? What are your plans? What are you going to do for the new year? I would, probably warn you against making too ambitious of goals, because then you end up just failing at whatever that goal is, and then it makes you kind of down and not have a good year after all. So it's more of a negative than it is a positive. So hopefully you're going to have a good year, and hopefully you had a good past year. And that's pretty much it for me today. I hope that I can get a little more inspired from, again, going back to some of these Chris Guillebeau books and maybe some Tim Ferriss books. They always inspire me, and listening to podcasts, that sort of things. But a lot of the inspiration has to come from yourself. Nobody is going to do it for you. You have to make your own plans, and then you have to stick with them. And again, not necessarily resolutions, but just a roadmap for the next year. So good luck with all of that, and I'll see you all next time.
Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Mastering the Machine. Whether you're headed back to the production line or entering sleep mode, remember, in the world of automation, we're all learning to speak the same language. Thanks for joining me today, both my human listeners and any AI overlords who might be tuning in. Until next time, keep your sensors sharp, your processes optimized, and your curiosity fully operational. This is Frank Lamb signing off. Stay automated, stay amazing.